And again, these faculty spotlights are about getting to know Reed faculty, understanding who they are and who they are to the Reed community. And as you've seen, this is our fourth faculty spotlight. We have one more, but we have some wonderful, wonderful panelists for whom I'm going to ask that they introduce themselves. And so what I'll ask y'all to do is, as you go around, let folks know who you are, how long you've been teaching at Reed and what department, but also what is your emphasis within your department? So what is your specialty? I think it's sort of interesting for students to, they might not initially realize that our faculty focus on a particular area. And I am going to start off with Kara.
Okay, great. Hey, everybody. My name's Kara Becker, and I teach in the linguistics department here at Reed. Within our department, there's just 3 of us, so we cover a pretty big field as well as we can. And I generally cover the social side of the study of language. So I'm mainly a dialectologist by training, which means that I do research about place-based ways of talking. So the way we vary the way we talk based on where we're from, focus mainly on American English. And I also look at all sorts of other ways that language aligns with aspects of the social world. So looking at gender, race and ethnicity, and things like that. So that's primarily what I do in my own research and also in the classes that I teach at Reed. Was that good, Milyon, or do you want me to keep?
I'm so curious. What does language tell us about where you're from? What give us?
Oh,
I know that's a very broad question.
Yeah. Well, so a pretty common thing would be like here in the Pacific Northwest, if you ask people, oh, do you think you have an accent? A lot of people from the PNW would say, no, not really. In fact, we all have accents in the sense that we all use language in a way that marks us as being from a particular place, because it's all relative, right? So if you're from Australia, an American has an accent, right? And so it just really depends on looking at the details of the different sounds and features, words, like different levels of language that all vary based on, place or like where you acquired language. For some people, that's more than one place. For some people, that's one place. That's a little more straightforward. Like if you've moved around, you might be a little more complex for us to figure out. But yeah, everybody has a way of talking that's unique to the place where they learned their language or languages.
So are you saying that you can tell where I'm from the way I say something like cat or
obvious?
dog?
Yeah. So despite the fact that you may have seen the movie My Fair Lady, and it's not actually possible to guess like the street where someone was born, not that level of detail. And no, I'm not analyzing the way that you talk. I try not to do that. I only ever do it to like celebrate. Like if I notice something, oh my gosh, I love this thing, this way you pronounce this word. So yeah, don't worry. I'm not trying to analyze you. Although sometimes like at a meeting, if I get bored, I will listen to people's vowels.
That is so cool. I want you to listen to me as I read my son's stories on his books.
Yeah.
Like a Festival of Nations, and I'm sure I get none of it right. So.
No, there's only what we do. And linguistics is really not interested in telling people what's right or wrong, but rather describing how people talk.
Oh. I like that. Judgment free.
Yeah.
Judgment free.
Felipe, how about you? What tell us about yourself.
Oh, so I clearly have an accent, so I'm very curious.
We all do.
Yes, and that's because I'm from Latin America. I'm from Chile. And I've been at Reed since 2020. I'm at the econ department. And within economics, I do basically 2 things. The first one is that I'm an economic historian, which basically means that I use data from archives or from the past to try to understand, basically, to try to answer questions that are relevant for how we understand economics today. So maybe a brief example of like that is that I study cartels. So cartels is when companies do conspiracies to increase prices artificially. And of course, that has been illegal in the US since 1890. So it's been illegal for 130 years or so. But in my country, in Chile, that was not illegal in the early 20th century. So one of the things I do is I go to archives and I look at newspapers where companies are talking about how to do these conspiracies. I understand from, and I understand how they, or I study how they work in practice, something that would not be possible to do, right, in modern times. And the other thing I do is that I'm, and this is like a really bad name for a field, I know, but I'm an industrial organization economist. And that doesn't have to do, I always make students guess, and they always tell me something as, oh, you figure out the layout of a factory or something like that. But it's not really, basically industrial organization is just a really bad name for people that study how markets work in practice. So for example, in the US, roughly a fifth of the economy is the healthcare sector. And the healthcare sector, as we all know, it has very particular rules. The prices, different people get different prices. There's a lot of like prices that are determined through bargaining or through legislation even. So basically, industrial organizations try to understand how these different rules impact incentives in the healthcare system, for example, in practice. How could we improve the healthcare system in practice? And how can it came to be, basically.
Excellent. Thank you, Felipe. So I heard you at another panel talk about cartels, and I thought you meant a completely different type of cartel. So I appreciate the clarification. It's good to have you.
So, I guess I did a very bad job at the other panel. I'm sorry.
No, it was all me. It was all me. Tamara, how about you?
Hi, folks. I am Tamara Metz, and I teach in the political science department and in the humanities program. And I am sort of a black sheep in my field in the sense that, though not my department, but political science, like both what Felipe and Carrera do, is interested in thinking about causal questions or empirical relationships between things. What's the relationship? So in Felipe's case, thinking about what's the relationship between the rules of a sector and how people behave in that part of the economy. Most of the people in my department do stuff like that. But as a political theorist, I focus on questions of very, very broadly, how should we live together? Which is to say, how have people thought? How have people answered that question in the past? But also, how do people answer it now? And what do I think, or what do we think about that question? So I usually ask my students, have they ever asked, is that fair? And if they have, then they've asked a question of political theory. And really, in some sense, that's like one of the fundamental questions of my discipline. So I myself work on gender as a big sort of lens through which I ask these questions, but I'm also interested in the family and how the family is a political unit, and specifically how I've done a lot of research and writing on marriage and the relationship between marriage and the state, and raised questions about is the way that we organize that now, is that a just organization, or should we want to change it, and why? So yeah, in my department, we range from, we have people who write about or do research on nuclear weapons, and we have people who do research on comparative politics between, different countries, say in Latin America. And we have people like me who ask questions about what is just and how should we live together.
That's excellent. It's so interesting because as you speak, Tamara, I'm thinking, gosh, you almost sound, this is bad to say, like an economist.
Oh,
Or
that's
would you say?
I would have said the opposite. Many in my department like aspire to be economists. They love the way economists are so scientific. That's but as a political theorist, I'm more like a philosopher, right? So for instance, you may have like that we have folks in the philosophy department who are asking just conceptual questions like, what is it? Well, let's see, I'm trying to come up with a good example of this, but just for instance, what is the state? That's a conceptual question. What is the state actually? And there are folks in the philosophy department, but also in my department who ask that question. Versus a question about why do people vote the way they vote? That's what a political scientist does. That's a kind of like what an economist does, right? Why do people buy things this way? And the answer has something, or the hypothesis is that it has something to do with rules of the economy. So yeah, I get to ask the question that any 18-year-old, I mean, I can't see your faces, but I'm imagining that many of you have asked the question, is that fair before?
Yeah.
To me, that's like the heart of what I get to both write about and teach about.
So a philosopher might say, what does it mean to be just? Whereas someone in political science might say, how is justice applied?
Yeah, and what happens when if we have rules that say justice is X, how do people behave as a result of that? That's the political scientist question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you one more thing just to belabor the point. So if I'm a student, how would you finish this? If I often wonder or have thoughts about this, then I'm probably interested in political science.
If you want to know why rich people are voting for the Republican Party, you would want to take a political science class, because that would help you understand how social characteristics seem to be related to political messages and maybe interests and so forth. And not just related, but is actually that those things are seem to have a causal relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
That's helpful. And I'm actually going to ask this for each of you. So I'm going to start again with you, Kara. Students who often wonder this or think about these types of things should really consider linguistics.
I think I would answer that. I would say this sentence: if you nerd out about anything related to language, and that could be like the etymology of a word, it could be learning other languages. We have a lot of students that come to us of just love language learning. If you find yourself sort of Googling little things and trying to answer questions about language, you should definitely come to us. You probably already are interested in coming to us. And we have a really nice, we have a really beautiful community at Reed. It's a really rare thing for a small liberal arts college to have a linguistics department at all. And we have one and have a really, vibrant community of students. And yeah, I guess I would say they're all united in their nerdery around all things language. There's so many different things that you can be interested in, but yeah, that's my question. Milyon, how does that work?
That really does. Yeah, it absolutely does. Felipe, how about you? If students are all usually have thoughts around these types of issues or these types of questions, economics is the way to go.
Well, first of all, I would say economics tends to be very, very broad. So unfortunately, we have a lot of things in common with, not unfortunately for political science, for example, we have there's a lot of economists trying to do basically research that kind of like invades a little bit of political science, for example, or history, as in my case. But I would say that if you're interested in things such as, if you remember like the last recession, and you're interested in kind of like why it happens that one year the economy is like doing great and everybody seems to have a job and everything seems to be like everything seems to be going great, and then from one moment to the other, like the situation shifts, right? How if nothing really fundamental or intrinsic change in the actual, the economy, why does we have like this like very mark business cycles, for example. Or if you're interested in like, how do business decide what to sell, what products to manufacture, or how do they decide how to set their prices, right? Those are kind of like very general questions. But I would say that coming from a developing country, also like in general for us, I would say it has to do with why the economies of our countries work like not, like why our countries have performed poorly compared to the US. It's for us a very big motivation for studying economics. And sometimes, this is something that we talk a lot in grad school, the specific ways in which our countries have failed, like explains kind of like what are the specific areas of econ that are interesting to us. So for example, in Argentina, they have had lots of problems with inflation. They have had really big like recessions. So Argentinians tend to be macroeconomists. In the case of Chile, we had and macroeconomy is basically the way like the economy as a whole works. So basically Argentinians are interested in understanding how things can go bad in general in the economy. In the case of Chile, we are very traumatized by our dictatorship in the 1980s. That dictatorship basically made the economy as a whole to work pretty well, but they basically they mess up with each individual sector in the economy. So for example, they destroy the education system, they destroy the public transportation, the pension systems. So in Chile, we're all microeconomists because we're trying to understand how things can work poorly, in particular, in each of these sectors, basically. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you very much. And I have another question. And I spent a lot of time talking about the de-emphasis of grades and what it does for an individual. I've had one faculty member, Noella, sort of say, grades are often the end of the conversation. And one of the reasons we're de-emphasizing grades is because learning is actually the conversation. And how sometimes for prospective students, not getting that grade feedback takes a lot of getting used to, but once you're used to it, you can't think of it any other way. Because you sort of have these paradigm shifts in understanding material, not just what you can remember. And so we have a student that sort of thoughtfully wanted to know what is our culture around how feedback is given on assignments. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how that idea is conceptualized in your classroom or in your experience.
I can say a few things about that. I've been teaching here for 18 years, and when I first got here, I thought it was a little bonkers that we give grades at the end of the semester, but we don't, it's not our practice to share them regularly. Students can go to their advisors and get that information, but we really, it's not front and center. And I really thought it was kind of kooky. And then I taught for a couple of years, and I realized that it really did, in my experience, shift the focus of all of us to the activity of learning and the kind of the meat of what is going on in my classroom and in our classrooms and beyond.
All of that, us, you, and the students.
Yeah. Like it really freed us all up to think, to focus on the learning and not so much on the outcome. So then the question becomes, what kind of feedback is most useful to help my students learn? And that actually, it took me some time to figure out what was going to be most effective in that way. And I will say over the last 18 years, I've become it's become much more individualized and also targeted. I've learned things like, sometimes less is more. I insist that all my students come and see me in my office hours at least once a semester. and that gives me an opportunity to kind of go deeper into who they are as a student. And then it helps me think about how to give them feedback. And so, yeah, I actually have come to see that the way that I give feedback as 100% central to the learning that is happening in the classroom and beyond. And the grade, though important, I mean, grades do matter in the world, but to me, it's the end, it's at the end of the thing. And really what I care about is how my feedback and their interest are working together to more learning.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, I also have moved more in the direction of what Tamara was saying about kind of learning more about each student and kind of where they are, and not just what my own goals are for every student in a course that I'm teaching, but what goals does each student have and kind of what they're working on. And that ties into this idea that you were, or the point that you were making about kind of tailoring our feedback. That's something I think is really special about the model. From a practical perspective, it does mean a lot more effort on the part of the faculty here, because, like, to give an example, most of the work that comes in for my courses they're papers. They're basically write-ups based on original research, but kind of like you can imagine a paper. Well, if I read a great one, if I were just going to give a grade, I could just like write an A on the top and like, great job. I think that's what happens, and just like move on. And what I do instead for all the papers that I receive, all the work that students submit to me, is like I sit down and deeply engage with it. And then I communicate back to the student things about it, right? So like if tomorrow we're writing one of those papers, I wouldn't just be like, great job, because I'm sure you'd write a great paper, right? I would say, like, it's my job to say to Tamara, here are things that worked really well in the paper. These are the strengths. Here are some things you could do next time to make it even better. And that actually takes a lot of effort and kind of engagement. And man, I wish that I had gotten that in my own college experience, right? Because if you're a bright student, you could kind of sail through and just sort of go, okay, am I getting the grades that I'm looking for? And I think what we offer is something really different, which is this really intimate connection around the work and the learning. And I get an opportunity to like engage with each student in that way. And then hopefully, right, they can take that in and look to the next assignment or look to the work that they're going to do, and take that feedback in, which is much more meaningful, I think, than just getting an A or some percentage points or something like that. So it's a deep engagement that I find really satisfying and enjoyable at the end of the day.
Do y'all make any connection with the style of teaching and the fact that students call you by your first name? Is there a relationship there? Is that something totally different?
Yeah, I think there's a relationship. I always find it interesting when you all kind of always know a new student, because they'll address you and like professor, and like, no one ever called you that. But the point of it, as I understand it, is to sort of decrease the distance between faculty and students. It's the reason many of us sit around a table together and talk. So the conference style of teaching, that feels also in the same spirit. And yeah, the idea that a student thinks of me as another human who's there kind of learning and facilitating, and I have knowledge, but like that we're in this thing together, that we're doing this thing together, it feels appropriate that, that we would call each other by our first names. Yeah.
It took me, I had maybe a couple professors like that. It was so hard to bridge that gap.
Weird,
Yeah.
An area where people said no ma'am and yes ma'am. You know where that is?
Yeah. I mean, I had never called even my dissertation advisor. I called him professor. That like to be at a place, it was kind of like it was in line with the grading. It was like, it was a big shift, but it toward a kind of like close, intimate learning environment that in the best way.
Yeah. I mean, if I could add just a little thing, I think that another thing that is very different with just having grades is besides the fact that it's super individualized and fine-tuned basically to not only kind of like where the student is at, but also like the student's future plans and so on. It's also kind of like that when you just give a grade, in particular if the grade is low, right?
Mhm.
It's really hard to be constructive with a grade. But
Mhm.
with feedback, you can basically, feedback gives you a lot more flexibility. So you can be, you can, for example, say, you can, for example, say like, look, right now we're still facing challenges. We're not where we would like to be, but we are seeing a lot of progress. But I think that you're doing a really good job in this aspect of the assignment, for example.
Mhm.
And but when you just give a grade, right, it's so blunt, right?
Mhm.
So I think that at least for me, like how to use feedback, how to use the added kind of like nuisance that you get with feedback is like it has been like great.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm curious. So I have a couple questions from our folks who are here, and one or two people can answer this. And I think sort of interesting. Um, Regarding the recent political backlash regarding DEI issues around the country, are those conversations coming up in your classroom? And what is it like? I'll add this to take sort of a current event and apply it to what you're talking about now. And if one or two people can give 1 or 2 minutes towards this question. Tamara, do you want to start?
I was going to say I can start, but I haven't had a lot of classroom, recently to speak about this. So I feel like
But in terms
actually,
of current events, like how do you usually sort of tackle things like
oh,
that?
how do I? Okay. Sorry, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, so I maybe am not like every professor in the world in this way, but I feel really strongly that my classroom needs to be a place where students can think aloud about a bunch of like the range of views, and so I try very hard to not let my own politics be very obvious to the students, and I try very hard to encourage the views that might not seem popular to kind of come up and to test them out in the classroom. So with a current event, whatever it is, I also spend a good amount of time in all of my classes because politics are hard to talk about. A lot of the starting part of a class is, okay, we're going to be talking about things that are hard to talk about, and we might really disagree. We're going to have to figure out how to talk about them, nonetheless. That's what learning is. And so, with that background, I then often will encourage people to take the opposite view of what they assume or their actual position is, just to try it out, see what they can do with it. And I say you can have your politics outside the classroom, but here we're thinking about politics.
Mhm.
And it doesn't always work, but I've got some great stories that I have some funny stories around this exact issue. But yes, I find that it often works, and it's exhilarating when it does. So I don't.
That's great.
Yeah.
Kara, this is not in your classroom. Felipe, were you going to say something?
Just very briefly that I was just thinking that kind of like the most interesting basically conversations around issues that I mean these sort of issues that we've had in my classes have been in my economic history classes, where sometimes we have to talk about basically economic structures, right? That such as slavery, for example, right? That have to shape really like the institutions and the way like the US and even and also like Latin America work, right? So it's been really so in general, it's been I feel the students, Reed students are very mature in the sense that they can have like tough conversations and keep some distance with basically what we're talking, in the sense that they can basically engage in a constructive but descriptive basically analysis of basically the institutions or whatever it is that we're studying. And basically whenever I teach a class around a topic like that, at the end we have kind of like a little like debrief, or a little basically if change. I ask the students whether this change in any way like their perspective of about any of these topics, and that those conversations are always like really, really interesting, and I think the students really appreciate like that insight.
I love that. That's great. Kara, this is not your classroom in particular, but I know, for example, one of the linguistics classes that we have on campus, there is a student who is sharing their own unique language with current students who are completely unfamiliar with that language, and they kind of have to figure out how language is constructed. I say that because it's such a hands-on sort of real-time experience. Do you know much about that sort of that class that's taking place, or do you have another example of something you're doing that's similar?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about that class. It's a pretty, it's a really exciting class offered often in linguistics. It's called field methods, and right, you hire someone who speaks a language, and they serve as a consultant. And so they come into the classroom, and the students learn and are trained to sort of find out things about the structure of this, to them, unknown language. So that's a really very cool class that I've taken, and that is, I think, being taught this semester. But I would say in general, all the classes in linguistics are very quote unquote hands-on, in the sense that because we want to understand how language works, we have to gather data, be empirical, like work hands-on. So in all the every class that I teach has an empirical component. So we work with data. So the intro class that I'm teaching right now to sociolinguistics, I send students out in the second week of class to do data collection on campus, and they're gathering in an anonymous way. They're gathering the different ways that we respond to being thanked. So if you think about that just for yourself, there are various ways you can respond to being thanked. You can say, you're welcome. You can say, no problem. You can say, sure, and smile. You can not respond. And so there's about 7 or so options that we're aware of, and there's a change going on, so such that like older people are more likely to say you're welcome, and younger people are more likely to say some of these newer variants. So like right away, I just send students out to gather data on that, and then we build a big group data set where we had 700 observations, and then we all analyze different aspects of it. So like whether the age of the person responding affects how you respond, what variant you choose. I was just reading some analyses today. We evaluated the level of distraction in the interaction, which was a new variable. So how distracted did you think the person was? Some students have been doing some really cool analyses showing that the more distracted you are, the more informal your response is. So you're more likely to say no worries or something like that, because you're kind of not paying attention. So maybe that is helpful to give some examples of just like the ways that I think we work really closely with actual language in use. That's just sort of kind of intrinsic to how we're going to learn about language overall.
I love it whenever you're talking about this stuff. It always resonates. Like my grandma would tell me, just say thank you. Or just say you're welcome, you know?
You're welcome, yeah.
I'd demur, and she's like, just say you're welcome.
Yeah,
So,
it's considered polite, right? And then there are blog posts and people complaining like, oh, kids these days, they don't know how to be polite anymore because they're not saying you're welcome. And of course, so one thing everyone should know is that linguists also love young people because you're the innovator. So you're always bringing new things into the linguistic system. So people out there might be complaining, oh, kids these days, but linguists are like, yeah, kids these days. It's really cool. What are you up to, right? And so there will be new changes in the language that are generally introduced by adolescents, teenagers, that are a big source of what we're interested in, and kind of tracking linguistic systems and how they change over time.
That's
So
great.
sorry, I didn't mean to say anything bad against your grandma. I'm sure she's great. And
No, I
it's a
doubt
pretty
you changed
common
your mind,
thing.
but
Yeah, older people are like, why is this thing? And you're like, because language change. And it's really
It's
actually really interesting and exciting.
so much relevance. And what I'll note is that you sort of mentioned, oh, there's three folks in our linguistics program. It's still a nationally leading program. You produce more PhDs per capita than most any other school in the United States for linguistics. And so, but that's true of all of your departments. And Reed overall is ranked fourth in the nation for producing PhDs. Not to say that everyone has to go out and get their PhD, but we sort of use that as an ad hoc indicator to say that if you do well here, you will do well anywhere. And so I love it. And we could talk about the linguistics lab and other features of all of our programs. I'm going to jump to what I really want to know is what y'all think the secret sauce is. So maybe you could work that in. But we've got a couple of new questions here, and they're both sort of associated with research and collaboration between staff and students. But let's sort of hone in on this research. Can you all give a quick example of something that somebody might do research for in your department in the summer and during the school year? Just quick example.
I can give two quick examples. I regularly work with students on research. So during the year, we have a linguistic diversity ambassadors program where we hire students and they create like student-led either products or programming that's just related to kind of bringing awareness to different aspects of linguistic diversity. So they might decide they want to like host a movie night and then have a conversation afterwards, or they'll table and kind of teach people about some topic. And so that's a paid like opportunity, as well as I think a nice program that speaks to kind of one of our values. But I also do more, research where I bring students on and work with them in areas where I'm already researching. So one project I have going with several students who are collaborating together all the way from data collection through conference presentation and then writing up the research for publication. And this is about a linguistic feature that we call uptalk, where you have a declarative sentence, but it sounds like you're asking a question. You might be familiar with it. And it's associated with often the speech of young women, but all young people use it. And we did an experiment where we put uptalk in use a voice, and we told people they were listening to different personae. So we're like, you're listening to a valley girl, or you're listening to a stoner or a butch. And then we had them rate the voices. And that tells us something about kind of what the variable means to people in terms of how it's associated with different aspects of social identity. So that's just one example of a project that I've been working on with students. It's been really interesting.
It's really neat.
So in my department, we all work with students during the summer. We have a summer fellow, and now we're having a centralized system of applications. So we receive tens of applicants, and it's a really fun process by itself. And the kind of things that students do with us go from designing surveys, working with data sets, doing maps, stuff like that, that actually become the papers that we send for publication. So just to give an example, this summer I'm going to be working with 2 students, and one of the things they're going to be doing is to map all the sites where V2 missiles fell in London in World War II. And the idea is that the places that basically where these V2 missiles fell, they became empty lots, and in the 50s, a lot of social housing was built on these neighborhoods. So where I'm trying to understand with, I will try to understand with the student whether this basically became kind of like a random allocation of social housing to neighborhoods that can help us understand the effects of building social housing for existing neighborhoods. And already one student last year, he worked on understanding how random were the sites where the V2 missiles would fall within the city. Now we're basically continuing that project with different students. So they're always like very fun projects. They're always like super fun projects. And then even we stay working with the students during the year if the projects Lex.
Mhm.
And in my department, we have a lot of what Felipe described. We have similar, that kind of actual research, but it's on different questions. So it's like we have somebody who's an expert on early voting and both what effects it has on outcomes and what whether, you know, people make use of it and how they make use of it. So we have research related to that happening pretty much every summer. If you're working with me, you're likely to be reading political theory and or sort of helping me find out about, say, family policies, and then helping me think about how to understand the policy in the context of the theory that we've been reading. And often I have students who are in charge of pulling together an annotated bibliography. So we develop a bibliography together and they read the materials and provide short synopses that we then have a conversation about, and that helps inform what I then go on and write. And often, in fact, I just this morning had a meeting with a former student who's getting her PhD in political theory, and we're writing a paper together at the end of the summer. So those kinds of things, those kinds of relationships, you know, stick around for more than just read. And then I have other students who go on and work in actual politics. In fact, I have a pair of students who got married and now are powerhouses in the Oregon Pacific Northwest political activist scene. So lots of things happen in our department.
I mean, I'll tell you this, faculty form such close relationships with students that sometimes they help a faculty member mulch their lawn over the weekend. It's really amazing.
Wouldn't mind that.
Good point. And that student might end up going to graduate school, or I don't know. Who knows? We'll see what happens.
But you know, this is a joke between me and Tamara that I sprung on her. But honestly, when this individual shared it, I thought, wow, this is a real relationship.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, they're not a student here anymore, but the student talks about Tamara at least once a week, with such high level of fondness, and I just think it's a great example of the care and relationship you develop with students here.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna do a few really quick hits for questions. I'm gonna ask you all. What's gonna be my last question? Yes, faculty work just as closely with non-traditional students as they do traditionally aged students. We do have a transfer student population and a non-traditional student population here at Reed. There are plenty of upcoming events. So this is one of many events. These are really going to start coming across your calendar. Reed is going to be across the nation in many of your areas. We also have, for each department you'll see represented here, we're going to have more specific faculty office hours where faculty will do a deep dive in the department. Hopefully they'll have a current student there and they'll tell you a little bit about what it means to be an economics major, linguistics major in much more detail, but those will be much more academically focused on the department requirements. How do you connect with the faculty? Just let us know. You can go on the website, request to speak with a faculty member, but contact us and we will put you in touch with the faculty member because we'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but then relay that other information on to faculty. So that is the best way to do it. If you're coming to campus for a visit and actually want to sit down and speak with someone, if it's possible, we'll try to arrange it, but we try to give you all the resources that you'll need and other events that we have here on campus. Student life, the academic program, you're going to have conversation with me and Audrey. Carnell and I get together and we answer all the tough questions to get rid of all some of the rumors and things that, you know, people think that are just caricatures and not real features of the college. And so for our faculty, I thought this one was particularly interesting, and we could say a lot about it, but you know, someone's just curious how faculty contribute to the community at Reed outside of research, publications, teaching in a class. And because there's other stuff that y'all do, right, as a part of our community. Tamara and Kara, you both come together in a choir, for example. do you sit next to each other, or are you two totally different sections?
We
Oh,
often see each other.
Oh,
yeah.
do you?
My ear is glued to Kara. Kara Becker is a great singer.
Oh, that's really cool.
True.
So, for example, choirs.
Yeah.
But what are some of the other ways that y'all are contributing or connected to the community?
Mm.
Well, I wasn't going to talk about the choir. I don't know if this is what you're interested in, Milyon, but I would say that in the last few years, I've become really interested in community engagement. And so this is something I think that there are several faculty thinking about this question about kind of how to become engaged either with the Reed community or actually the broader community around our campus. And that feels like something that's really important. And so I've been working on developing a class on language and discrimination that has a community engagement component. And so the work for that class and the sort of way we approach that class is that the students and I think together about kind of ways that we can take the information that we have or the things that we're learning and how we might apply those kind of more broadly. So to people who are not in the class, basically. And maybe this next time I do it, we'll be working on making a connection with a local elementary school and sort of connecting with younger students and providing opportunities for our students to do that. So I don't know if that's what you were thinking or choir type stuff. But when I think of community, yeah, I think a lot about kind of like, we don't want to be too stuck in our intellectual campus bubble, which is an amazing place to be. We also want to be really thinking seriously about the other people that are around us in our environment. So
Care without any examples in mind, I think that sounds really cool. I mean, that sounds wonderful. And what I also hear you saying is you, among other faculty, want to stay connected to where we are. And some of this certainly has to do with our community, but also the greater community in many different ways. Do you feel like folks are often trying to bring their discipline to bear out in the world?
yeah, as I understand it, I mean, it's a model that works for all sorts of disciplines, right? So I'm thinking about how to make it work with the work that I do in linguistics, but I'm learning from a colleague in dance who has a course where anyone from the broader community can come in, and students, I think, like design modules and they dance together. And so there are some really amazing examples from other colleagues that we have on campus, a lot of different models. Yeah. So I think a kind of, burgeoning field. And there are some exciting things happening.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. That's perfect. Tamara, Felipe, how about you?
I mean, I don't know if that this counts as, but I mean, one thing that I really enjoy, that I really enjoy in since I joined Reed was I was able to be part of like a senior symposium one year, and senior symposium I thought it was like really fun. Basically senior symposium is kind of like senior students. They lots of them take this half unit class where you meet like you meet during an evening, and basically you do it at basically each person in your group would host like one night, and you read a book, and then you basically have a book club sort of like I found it so interesting because before coming to Reed, well, of course, I was doing my PhD. Before that, I was in engineering school. And so I've always been only with people that are in math, into kind of like, like hard sciences, but people that tend to have like the same logic. So to me, like Senior Symposium was really cool because for the first time, I got to like really, like feel like the interdisciplinary, like how diverse our students are. So it was great fun. I really love it. And in Latin America, it's very it's a big part of being a student to be engaged with the community surrounding campus. So and I used to run a 100 volunteer microfinance program in my engineering school when I was an undergrad. So I would really love, I mean, after I get tenure, hopefully, like one of my aspirations is to get to form I would love to have like some sort of like instance where both the students and hopefully faculty, right, we could do some sort of like volunteer work with the surrounding community in things that could be such as like microfinance would be very natural for econs department students, but could be other things as well. But that's one thing I kind of like a long-term project.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. And Tamara, you have the floor last.
Oh, well, so let's see. The question is, what do I do outside of being a teacher and a researcher, and a singer? I mean, you know, the Pacific Northwest and Portland is an amazing place, and for many reasons. One of the things that I love about Portland and I take advantage of is that there's a small but super accessible and vibrant arts scene. And so one of my favorite organizations that I'm involved with on a regular basis is an organization called PAIR, which has creative mentoring for homeless youth. And it's an arts-based mentoring program. And I'm engaged with them in various ways, but one of the things I love about it is that it draws on the very vibrant and accessible arts community in the city. And so, yeah, I'm often directing students to pair that to look, you know, like as to be volunteers, to be actually I've had a student go on and work there. So I don't know if that captures what you're thinking
No, it
about.
absolutely does.
Yeah.
And what I'll say is you all also serve on committees here on campus that focus on different components of Reed's community, whether it's you know, academic progress or legislation. And so, you know, there are all these things that we do on different levels in addition to teaching that really integrate us into you know, into this living organization that Reed is. And so I want to tell you all thank you for coming and joining me for this. And thank you on behalf of our students, our guests, which stuck with us basically the whole time. This is a real treat to actually see who our students are engaging with and who they'll engage with. So I appreciate your candid, authentic answers. And for our guests, I think you just got a glimpse into what it's like being able to connect with human beings here on campus and three very special people among our campus community with a lot of folks who care about who you are, what you'll do, and how you will engage. All of our programming here on out is going to be unique. And so we'll have one more spotlight session, but we have a lot of other stuff. You're not saying the same thing over and over. But the goal is to help you make an informed decision about where you want to be for 4 years. And if you like what you hear here, you can see this happening for you. You can imagine that senior year version of you at Reed, and it's who you're most excited about. We would love for you to be a part of our community. Contact your admission counselor and me with any questions, but thanks a lot for hanging out with us today. And we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks.